Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Happy Sunday. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. Today, we got Steve Fleck back on the Zoom line. Haven't seen Steve in a couple months. What's going on, my man? How are you?
Hey, all good. And yourself?
Doing good. Doing good. It's August is over, man. It's like, what
Yep.
the hell happened here?
Fastest summer on record.
Oh, God. And the summer that we want to forget, right? I think is the better
Yeah,
way
I
to
think
say it.
anyway. After the spring, you want to forget, right? The longest
Yeah.
spring leads into the shortest summer, and hopefully the winter will be short. But I don't know. Careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. So we got a show today that a lot of you have asked for, Dire Straits. So we're going to rank the studio catalog, 6 albums. As Steve and I were talking to right before we went on air, for me, this was kind of difficult. I think my favorite was pretty well decided early on. My least favorite also decided, but all those ones in the middle, they're all pretty damn good. And it was kind of hard for me to pick one over the other. I think I kind of did the best I could. So we'll see. Curious to see what Steve has put together for his list. So as always, we let our guest go first here. So Steve will kick us off with his number 6 favorite album of Dire Straits.
Okay, so Pete, between I kind of grouped the Dire Straits albums in periods, and we all know they kind of started off as kind of a more of a kind of clickety clackety groove roots rock band, and by the time they had evolved to their final album, the last couple just expanded with Knopfler's songwriting abilities, ideas kind of exploded, and so the instrumentation and the production had to kind of match that. So I kind of categorized the first 2 albums kind of one way, and then their last 5, kind of maybe even their middle 3 one way, and then the last 2 another way. And so with that in mind, I do kind of favor a specific period over the other. I won't say at this time what that is, but you'll kind of be able to scope it out and figure it out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make probably the unremarkable choice of On Every Street being my number 6. Yeah, On Every Street, I like quite a bit, actually. Got a lot of really good tunes on it. Very well produced, great band on the album. It just, not to criticize here, just a little bit of background as far as for why I, look at it as probably my least favorite. And, doesn't mean I didn't, listen to this album day in and day out when I got it, because I did. I was a big fan, so I'm on that tour. It's the only time I ever got a chance to see Straits. But to me, the album itself is a little unfocused. And it did come out at a time when, and I think this was probably done on purpose by the man himself, but, he was looking to just kind of let things cool down a little bit before he reformed that band, because they did break up in 1988 after that huge Brothers in Arms tour. And they got back together, did another album. I think On Every Street is a really strong album. And like we, kind of alluded to, there's no real clunkers in their catalog at all. And so to me, it just is, out of all of them, is probably a little more difficult to define, a little more moody. And let's say, this is a moody band, a moody catalog. But very introspective, kind of got to be in the right mood for it. A couple of the tracks to me kind of meld into each other, maybe feel a little too much the same. That said, great production, some great highlights on the album. Love a lot of things about it, and hence, number 6 for me.
Yeah, it's number 6 for me too. And do you think how weird is it? And you brought it up. So they have this gigantic album, Brothers in Arms, and then they break up like not that long after. I mean,
Yeah.
when was the last time you heard of a band having such a huge success and then like that they're gone? And then, is maybe this album a little bit unfocused? Because that's kind of the way I look at it. I agree with that. It's a very good album. It's kind of all over the place style-wise, I think. 6 years after the big album, was it maybe too long? Again, they broke up for a while, so it's hard to say. I don't know. I just and you can tell because I think by the time this came out, I think the excitement over Dire Straits had kind of died down because this didn't sell a fraction of what the previous album sold. It was like 1 million
No.
copies, and 1 million for most bands is a lot. But I mean, Brothers in Arms sold 9 plus here. That's only here. So I don't know, but
Yeah,
there's
I
some
want
good
to
stuff
say,
on it.
yeah. Well, sorry to interrupt you. I think worldwide, I was just checking it out, and I think On Every Street worldwide sold 8 million.
Oh, that much all told. Okay, because I know here it didn't do
Worldwide.
that well.
So
Yeah, here it didn't do that well. Yeah.
no, it definitely did not. But yeah, I think if you probably look at, and I didn't, but I just know it was huge, and so do you. But if you look at Brothers in Arms, probably worldwide, you'll see a multiple of that figure.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and what does it say about American taste? I mean, I've talked about this a lot. So by the time the late '80s and early '90s were rolling around, a lot of music lovers here in the UK would just kind of jump on whatever's kind of hot at the moment. So it's like I think all those people who were so into this band back from Brothers in Arms had already moved on to something else, whereas maybe the rest of the world's like, hey, we still love these guys. We're still going to buy their records, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
but I agree. I
think
think
that
it's
was definitely the case.
yeah, it's
By
got to
the
be right because I mean, in '91, I mean, look what's coming, look what's happening here. Grunge and alternative, the Seattle scene, dance
yeah,
music and rap and hip hop, all that stuff is becoming big
yeah,
here. And I think all of a sudden, Dire Straits were the dinosaurs, and every band, every legacy band goes through that. That's just the way it is. But
yeah, yeah.
Cole and
Metallica
Elvis,
having a huge year that year.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Look at some good
Yep.
songs. I mean, when it comes to you, it's pretty cool song. Cole and Elvis, I always liked. I love the slow blues song "Fade to Black." I almost wish they did more
Totally
of
agree
that
with
kind
that.
of thing. Right? Really good
Totally
song.
agree. Yep. Yep.
Heavy Fuel is interesting. It's kind of a cool hard rocker, but it kind of sounds like ZZ Top a little bit, But and I love Planet of New Orleans. Like that's another kind of cool thing that I wish they would done more of. But
Yeah, you mentioned two of the highlights for me on there, which was Planet of New Orleans, and one of the other ones I wanted to mention, which I really liked quite a bit, was You and Your Friend.
yeah,
It was right along the same kind of like bluesy kind of rocky, and I love his guitar sound on this album. He's using that Pensasure with those EMG pickups, and it's a really, like I said, there's a lot to like about it. And I just want to call out the title track is one of my favorite tracks that they've done. Just kind of too little, too late, and to single material at the time. But I really do love the title track, On Every Street. Very moody, and I love the way it picks up at the end. It's just this beautiful chord progression with a very subtle kind of guitar progression that I tried to imitate myself here and there and just never quite could. But yeah, shout out to that.
there you go.
Agree with you there.
Cool. All right, you're number 5.
All right, so moving on to number 5. It's a kind of tough one here. To me, I kind of would go either way. I'm gonna say, and it's gonna be a weird decision here, but I'm gonna go with the first album, and that might be a little shocking to some, but to me, and this could go either way. The first album is a great album, stylistically and I think production-wise and statement-wise. But we'll get into the obviously the pinnacle of that early 2-set, which is obviously the second album. But I don't want to spoil things here. But I like the first album quite a bit. Just a couple of the tracks just not as memorable for me. Obviously, some huge songs on that album, some great songs, and some really different. For the time, what was it, 1978?
Yeah.
Very different production-wise and arrangement-wise. Just really stripped down and very guitar basic and kind of jazzy, right? Pick Withers was a real jazz drummer. I don't know if Illsley was a jazz bass player. Certainly not to my ears, but man, with Pick Withers on the drums at this time swinging away, it really worked. And they had some kind of real down and dirty, I guess they're kind of calling it pub rock, which they were cranking out at the time. So, their first album to me follows up their last album on my list.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I hear that term pub rock all the time, and I got to tell you, I never liked it because I all these different bands called pub rock, and none of them sound remotely alike. So I just honestly, I don't know what some people think is pub rock, but I
Yeah,
can kind of see that, right? The kind of bluesy,
yeah,
kind of barroom
yeah,
type of thing. Yeah, yeah, kind of rootsy. But I've been called. I've heard so many different bands called pub rock, and the majority of them don't have anything in common. So I always wonder, like,
uh-huh.
kind of exactly, is there like a definition of pub rock? I don't even know. Who knows?
Yeah. I don't either. I just saw the term and I thought, all right, I guess I can see where they're going with that. But yeah, to your point, what exactly is it?
Yeah, I don't know. All right, so here we have my number 5 through my number 2. Very difficult for me because I like all these albums, and I rehashed my list numerous times, and my number 5 was actually higher earlier, and then I moved it around because I was listening to these, and I'm like, you know. So I'm going to go with my number 5, 1979's Communique.
Yep.
I really like this album, and it almost pains me to put it this low, but I don't know. It's their second album. All right.
Yep.
Kind of a little drop off in sales from the first album, but I think it's almost just as good in my opinion.
Yep.
Angel of Mercy, terrific song. I like the country kind of twang of the title track. Lady Ryder is easily a top 10 Dire Straits song for me. I love Lady Ryder.
Agreed.
Always
Yep.
have. I mean, man, that soaring guitar and those hooks in that song. I mean, it's
Oh yeah. Yeah.
great stuff. And Once
Yeah.
Upon a Time in the West is a terrific song.
Yep.
Love that. What's that kind of like blues meets reggae sort of thing? I love the kind of the rhythms of that song.
Yeah.
It's just very cool.
Yeah. That's. I don't know who kind of came up with that arrangement. It suits Pick Withers' style, kind of shuffly, kind of reggae like. Yeah. Love a lot of songs on that album. Agree with you.
And Single Handed Sailor, his guitar solos on that song are just sublime. So a really good album. I think for me, one of the reasons why I put it in a little bit lower is I think there's like 4 standout tracks for me, and then the others are good. And I think, you know, it's just, to me, I think less of a consistent album than some of the other ones that are going to come higher, but it's good nonetheless. So what are you
Right.
gonna do? Whatever.
Agree. Agree.
All right, number 4.
Number 4, again, getting tough. Number 4 will possibly surprise some, maybe even you. But to me, the sum of the parts was a little greater than the actual album itself. And therefore, and it's kind of a toss up between 2 albums with this one, but going to go here with, Brothers in Arms. Little kind of a shocking kind of twist, yeah, it could easily rate higher. When I go back and forth between all these albums, as you always, say yourself, lots of highlights on the album. A lot of people will probably, look at where I placed it and say, hey, how can you do that? Well, I don't know how I can do that. I mean, if you talk to me tomorrow, it'd probably be in a different spot.
Exactly.
Just to me, Brothers in Arms is a very well produced album. To me, it is a little inconsistent and a little all over the map as it was its successor. And so, I mean, well, there's outstanding tracks on here. You got So Far Away, you got Walk of Life on both hits, you got Your Latest Trick, another hit, Brothers in Arms, obviously Money for Nothing, huge, all really, really strong tracks. And then, you've got sleepers like Brothers in Arms itself, One World, which is another
One World
nice,
is great. Yeah.
funky kind of, ripping kind of, heavier riff song. Lots of Les Paul on here. Yeah, it just, to me, production wise, it was state of the art in its day. And I think it does suffer a little now production wise, because it was one of the first all digital productions. And I haven't heard any remasters or anything along those lines, but it does suffer from that kind of lack of beefy lower analog end, which wouldn't come to some digital recordings until later on. And like I said, I know there's a number of reissues which I think have addressed that. But to me, I'm reviewing the original album as I originally hear it. And little digital thin. I kind of think of Bruce Springsteen's The River as the extreme example of that early digital album that you listen to it and you're kind of like, well, where's the bass? Where's the thump? Where's the kick? And I find the same thing here. And so I think production, well, it was, and engineering, well, it was a huge thing at the time. It was one of the first all digital like DVDs recorded at the time, suffers a little bit as a result of that. Sounds a little bit dated production and instrumentation wise, a lot of synths and things along those lines. I think the songs really speak for themselves. And, that's, if you will, my criticism. And it really, it's not a very strong criticism. It's just one of the things that I kind of looked at and said, all right, well, placing this is kind of why I placed it where it was.
Yep. I hear you. Well, it's my number 4 as well.
Okay.
Little too slick for its own good, maybe.
Kind of agree.
I agree with everything you said. I think there's classic tracks on here. They're classic and they were hits for a reason. So I'm not going to deny that. I like this album a lot. I think for me, it's kind of missing a little bit of the essence of the early Dire Straits sound. And I get it. It's mid 80s and this is what a lot of bands were doing and the big production values. I get all that. But there's great songs on here. I'm not going to deny it. Honestly, I just haven't listened to this one as much as the other ones in many, many years. And I think, and maybe it's burnout a little bit from some of these songs, but I think even when this album was really big, I still preferred some of the other ones. But
I would agree.
It's still a great album, right? I mean, I think that's my point is that every one of these albums is really, really strong. So there's just obviously some that I feel are stronger than others. And this is, for me, middle of the pack, Dire Straits, still really good. It sold a shitload of copies for a reason. And, but I don't know, the ones that are going to come next, I think are better. Just in my opinion, I enjoy them more. And I think they sound like classic Dire Straits, what I remember them as being anyway.
Yep. Well, yeah, we're on the same page with that. That's for sure.
Yep.
And so speaking of that, moving into, let's see, what would this be? Number
3.
6, 5, 4, 3, right?
Yep.
3 for me is going to be Communique, the second album. Like you mentioned, really like it a lot. To me, I think the production, this is Jerry Wexler, Barry Beckett, I want to say, production, who Barry being the keyboardist from Muscle Shoals. And of course, Wexler, being very instrumental in Muscle Shoals and God knows everything else from the 50s right on through the 80s. Big music guy, journalist turned producer. And so just a big improvement as far as I'm concerned in the sound of the album over the first album. Right. Lots of great songs, like you mentioned, Once Upon a Time in the West. I like News a heck of a lot. I like that acoustic intro and that kind of build, and that's probably why I like that on every street track so much. It's along the same lines arrangement wise. Where do you think you're going? Probably even more so. Like the title track a lot, and Angel of Mercy, and obviously, Lady Ryder is a fantastic song. Soaring, right? What was his guitar sound at the time with the Strat? Slightly distorted, almost clean, and in some passages it sounds just very creamy clean, but it's got that bite and that nastiness which you expect from a Strat play the way he plays, like, which is pretty much unique as far as I think guitar wise. So Communique for me, real good album.
Cool. Yeah, it is. All right, my number 3, 1982's Love Over Gold. In revisiting these albums, some of these I haven't listened to in a while. This is probably better than I even remember it when I was listening to it quite a bit. And when you have a song like Private Investigations on it, I mean, that's, a fantastic, lush, gorgeous guitar work all over it. the only thing I don't like about that song is the kind of spoken word vocals. But I get it. It kind of matches with the tone of the song. So, but then you got Telegraph Road,
Right.
which, I mean, that's like majestic. It's kind of proggy, right? And I think for me, he's probably has some of his best guitar work on any of these albums. And you know what it reminds me of? I was listening to that song again this morning, and it's like that song reminds me of some of like Springsteen's epic mid-'70s stuff a little bit.
No doubt.
Right? I mean,
Totally
it's just,
agree there.
I was like, man, I forgot about that. But, you know, I think those couple songs might be like some of their crowning achievements, I think. But then you got Hal Lindy's on this album, adding some different colors with guitars. You got 2 guitars here for the first time. Very cool. Industrial Disease. For me, kind of, I think almost foreshadows what's to come with Brothers in Arms and the later stuff a little bit. Good rock song. And then you got, you know, It Never Rains, which I love their kind of slow build songs, where you got like these little atmospheric guitar things starting it off, and then the song starts to build and build and build into a nice little rocker with some soaring guitar solos. Really, really cool song. Dig the production on this album. It's a winner, you know. Could have even been higher. I almost had this at number 2. I gave my number two position for reasons I'll talk about in a couple of minutes, but there's my number 3.
Absolutely. Well, you know, in obviously talking more about Love Over Gold, it's my number 2. You know, I did. It's funny because I remember buying these albums. I was a little late to the table with this band. Early 90s, I want to say, is when I started like filling in that collection. Probably had the first album and maybe one of the other ones, maybe the second album on vinyl for a while, and then started buying these CDs in the early 90s. And I'm going to say Telegraph Road. It's so strong. It's such a presence on this album. Love Over Gold was the last one that I bought. And I remember sitting there. I bought it at Lechmere. Okay, Lechmere. Doomed, I think, to obscurity, right? Or another retailer bites the dust.
Yep.
Picked it up there, brought it back, listened to it, and I was just like, whoa, listening to this again, really listened to it a lot. And, you know, obviously I really enjoy this album quite a bit for all the reasons you mentioned. I think the production's great. It's Pick Withers' last album in which he appears, but like you mentioned, Hal Lindes, who was kind of an unsung hero. Hal Lindes, who was the musical partner for Fish's greatest achievement, as far as I'm concerned. That music came from Hal Lindes. That was Vigil in a Wilderness of Mirrors, my favorite Fish album. And a lot of people forget that he did team with Lindes a little later on for one of the later Fish albums with not as great a degree of success in my opinion, but that tells me a little bit about Hal Lindes. But really, I mean, what we're talking about here is we're talking about the songs. To me, you know, Telegraph Road is just a smashing, just killer of a song. And you hit the nail on the head when you talked about how it reminds one of some of those old Springsteen early 70s, mid 70s epics. And I think the piano, I don't want to mention the guy's name because it's going to feature prominently in my number 1, but we'll just say that they do sound similar. The dynamics are fantastic. The guitar playing is fantastic. You know, love Private Investigations to death. When that plays, I mean, I think probably in the video they had Venetian blinds with a kind of film noir lighting, a little black and white here and there. That song is the Venetian blinds to me. It's mysterious. It's, you know, yeah, he's speaking the vocals. Totally hear your comment on that one. I think he's trying to make it a little more illicit sounding. It's a builder. It's a great live tune. Matter of fact, all the songs on this album translate well live, and I think I've seen them probably play live. They're just chestnuts. Love the building song, like you said at the end. Industrial Disease is a real good number, kind of predates Walk of Life. I think it's probably a much better, not much better, but a better track. And then you're talking, which am I forgetting here? Telegraph Road, Private Investigations. Yeah, I think I hit on all of it. Really love the album. Very atmospheric.
Yeah, I agree. So, you know, like you said earlier, you know, next week, ask us these questions. We could probably change this order around a little bit. So I gave my number 2 to the debut from '78. Probably because there's a couple songs on here that are like timeless tunes for me. And I think that while this might be top to bottom stronger, today I'm going to give this one the number 2 spot. Basically, Southbound again, Six Blade Knife, Sultans of Swing obviously is one of those tracks I think that we've all heard a million times, but it's still really cool when you hear it. It's one of those like overplayed songs that you really don't get sick of much. Wild West End is fantastic. Down to the Waterline is a great album opener. So I think it's a little rootsier, it's a little more laid back and bluesy, and I just, when you listen to this album, you get the impression that they hadn't quite found their footing yet. They were still just trying to figure it all out. There's a lot of kind of like country twang on this album, a lot of like laid back blues. So I think they would rock more on subsequent albums, but I think his guitar tone on this album is pretty damn impressive throughout. I will say, I think the only reason that Straits were not like one of my like upper echelon bands is I still to this day have a little problem with his vocals at times.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think that was always the weakest part of their sound. And I know some people love his singing. I don't dislike it, but there are times where I'm kind of like, I just want to hear the guy play guitar, because sometimes his vocals on a couple of these albums are for me, a little weak. Kind of a similar thing that I have with like guys like Tom Petty, and certainly drawing a complete blank.
Dylan?
Bob Dylan, that's it.
Yeah. Oh, well,
I just like Dylan so much that I just try to wipe his name out of my brain. Yeah. But there are times where his voice kind of hits me like those guys a little bit. But musically these albums are just like so spectacular. So, but so for today, I'm going to give the first album the number 2 slot, but that could change. I mean, like I said, 2 for me, 2 through 5 are all kind of about the same.
Yeah. And, it definitely his voice, especially in the earlier albums, it was Dylan. That's what it was. Yeah. He was a big fan. Matter of fact, after seeing them, Dylan invited them to play on his next album, which was his Born Again Christian album called Slow Train Coming. And that was also produced by Wexler and the other gentleman, Barry Beckett. Kind of brain cloud there. And if you check that album out, I'm by no means a Dylan fan, but I happen to love that particular album. And it's such a, weird spot in his career. He did that and another one after it, which were Born Again Christian albums. I'm not even talking about listening to the lyrics on those albums, but instrumentally, those are just phenomenal albums. And even a guy who doesn't really, I understand, I appreciate Dylan. I'm just not, it's never really called me to it, concept wise. And, I've never really appreciated his vocals, very original. I'll say that. And lyrically, I'm sure he was doing a lot. I just haven't listened to a lot of his stuff. Those 2 albums, I think, are really good. And it's funny that these guys, the drummer and Mark Knopfler, played on both those albums. And they were recorded around the same time in different places, but with the same producers, I think. I do get that. His early albums, the early Straits albums, were very Bob Dylan influenced. He kind of freed up his vocals a little bit towards the middle, and by the end of Straits and into his solo career, has become much more of a singer and less of a talker, if you want to put it in layman's terms, right?
Yep. Well, I think I know what both of our number 1's going to be.
Yeah. Well, here it is. Not to upstage anybody, but there it is.
Making movies.
1980.
80.
Yes.
1980, yeah.
I got to say, this album has everything. And it is, first of all, sometimes I look back at albums that came out around that time, 1980, early 80s, think of Black Rose, for example. Certain, the Thin Lizzy album. Think of, certain sounds that came out around the time of 1980. Some of them have that sound that we love the sound of the 70s. To me, that's early 70s, best sounding rock records, right? Yep. Some late 60s. But there's a certain sound in the 80s early 80s, when they got it right, that just pounds. And this is one of those pounders. And sometimes
80 to 83, 80 to 83, I think, right? Thereabouts.
Right? Yeah, definitely. Before things became predominantly digital and drum machine. But this was kind of the last breath of real instruments. And boy, they took advantage. I mean, these drums were not really affected all that much, but man, they sounded nice and big. The toms were huge, right? A lot of those 80s albums, think Henry Paul band, some of those toms on some of those, Tom fills in some of those Henry Paul albums. You had that kind of, the Cars, for example, big fat Roy Thomas Baker, toms and snare. And to me, the basis of this album starts with the drums. And it's just, bludgeoning drums, but tasteful. And all the songs kind of build. It's a rock album, and it's a little bit of a progressive rock album, if you want to use that term. I think Roy Bittan, there it is, I said it. By bringing in Roy Bittan here, you had the addition, the expansion of Knopfler's concepts as a songwriter growing, right? And he brings in Roy Bittan, who's a fantastic player, we all know. Mm-hmm. If ever a guy can, construct soundscapes, it's him. And that would become they eventually had 2 keyboard players in Dire Straits, and that would become a huge benchmark of their sound going forward, right until, they finish. But yeah, soup to nuts, all the songs on here. I just love even the kind of Funny Lace Boys track at the end. I do appreciate. It's kind of a fun way to end the album. If the album itself wasn't so strong, I probably wouldn't like Lace Boys nearly as much. But when earlier in the lineup you're batting Tunnel of Love, Romeo and Juliet, going back here, Solid Rock, Skate Away, and what's the hard rock tune that I'm missing? Espresso Love.
Espresso Love is great, yeah.
You have the tracks on the album, and I can't say enough about those, and won't right now because we're talking albums, but yeah, fantastic album.
Yeah, and you're right. This is kind of, for me, their first real rock record, like top to bottom, start to finish, right, for the most part. Yeah, I mean, you hit all the key tracks, and I have to credit Steve for getting me into Dire Straits 30 years ago or whatever it was, or close to 30 years ago. And this was my favorite Dire Straits record back then, and it's still my favorite Dire Straits record now. And I think, when you start off an album with Tunnel of Love, I mean, that closing guitar cadence is like, it's gorgeous, right? I mean, it's just, doesn't get much better than that.
Many times to reproduce that myself, and, yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
Take up the tone.
Yep. Romeo and Juliet, just a beautiful song. I mean, you named them all on here. They're all top to bottom really, really good. The production's great on this album. And that's why when I started putting this list together, I was like, all right, there's this. Now we got to figure out the rest. And I was like, well, I think this one's going to be at the bottom. Now what do we do with all these suckers, right? That's the hard part. So.
Yep. And the lettuce could go on the top, or it could go on the bottom next time you make the sandwich.
That's
Who
right.
knows where the is going, right?
Just hold the mayo. That's all, right?
That's it. Hold the mayo. Yeah, absolutely.
So there you have it, everybody. Dire Straits ranking the studio albums. I do want to make mention they got a couple terrific live albums too, which Alchemy and I forget what's the name of the other one, the later
On
one.
the Night,
both really really good, worth seeking out. It's a really good compliment to these studio albums. So there you have it. Curious to see what everybody thinks. If you guys are interested in the top 10 songs of Dire Straits, I think we can make that happen, and probably do that pretty soon.
Real soon.
Yeah, exactly, like later this week or next week, right?
There, nobody.
So make sure you visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Steve is coming right back for top 10 songs of Marillion, happening tonight as well. So stay tuned here on the channel, and we'll see you guys all real soon. Steve, don't go away. We'll see you in a few minutes.